want to go with the crowd, path of least resistance. It's easier just to believe or act this way or do this or that because it's what most people are doing, and I won't get as much backlash if I'm just acting like everybody else or saying what everybody else is saying or thinking what everybody else is saying. You get like this mob mentality. And that energy probably just moved through the crowd and grew from those little seeds of hatred that the leadership was planting with them. You know, we got to be careful not to let that happen to us today. There are Christians, there are whole churches that base what they believe and what they think and what they do on what they feel most people want to hear or want to see. Society's values. It's easier that way. You know, there's no pushback if you're just trying to be a people pleaser. We got to be aware of that though, because people like these guys know that. They know that it's easier to sway a crowd than an individual. And it's easy to lie about what most people believe. You know, I like watching a lot of, like military shows and things like that sometimes, and like spy things and movies and documentaries. And there was this one, I think it was a series on declassified CIA missions and things, and you'd have these guys on there, you know, now that they're allowed to tell the stories, telling all these crazy things that they've done around the world. And there was one, I don't remember the details, I believe it was like a third world country where there was, I think there was some dictator or communist or something. Basically, from the story, there was this bad guy who had the potential of winning this election, and it would have meant bad news for the people and maybe other parts of the world, maybe even us. And so what they did, they were putting out fake radio programs telling the people that the other guy was winning in a landslide. Now, I don't know if it was if they were even ahead, but they were making it out like this other person, the one that they wanted to win, the good guy or whatever, was just dead victory. I mean, he had it in the bag. And if you can convince a lot of people of that, it's going to affect their behavior. Somebody who is going to go vote against him might think, well, why waste my time? Why bother? I mean, I'm just going to be one vote against the thousands and thousands and thousands that he's got. Or other people will think, well, it's pretty much in the bag. Doesn't matter who I plan on voting for. I'm not going to go out and do it. And in the end, it worked. This guy who probably wouldn't have otherwise won ended up winning because of that. You know, we need to be careful in what we're listening to and what we're being told. You know, don't believe something a preacher says just because you see him on TV, or just because you find an article that they wrote online. Or there are a lot of people out there intentionally deceptive. I mean, there are others who are unknowingly deceptive by just out of ignorance and writing false things unknowingly, but there's a lot of people that want to push some pretty messed up ideologies. I've seen so many where they'll say these crazy out there things that are completely contrary to Christianity and to what the Bible says, and they'll even quote a bunch of Bible verses all over the place, peppered throughout there. They'll say some outrageous claim and then put a Bible verse in parentheses. And I thought, I'm going to check this out, and I went through the whole thing, and the majority of those verses didn't have anything to do with what they were even talking about. I think they just knew nobody was going to look them up, so they just believed what they saw. And what happens? Some people are going to see through that. But it's kind of like a shotgun approach. If you can trick a bunch of people with it, they're still doing damage. We've got to be careful. You know, Pilate knew Jesus was innocent. He could see through the lies. He even straight up told the people he was innocent. But they preferred to believe the liars that they had come to know and trust. It was easier. They didn't want to be the one to speak up against their leadership, the religious leaders. They didn't want to be the ones to say, no, that's not right. We should be letting Jesus go. Because then they're going to think, well, what if everybody else mobs me because I'm speaking up against them? There's fear, there's manipulation, there's intimidation, all involved in this. They didn't know that these religious leaders were deceiving them. They didn't know that they were being manipulative. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been manipulated so easily. I mean, have you ever been manipulated by anybody? I have. But once you figure out that they're a manipulator, once you know that they've been deceptive to you in the past, it's a lot easier to see through what they say in the future. If they had known that they were being lied to by their leadership, if they were willing to believe that, they wouldn't have fallen for the lies. Once you know that somebody's manipulating you, it doesn't work. You stop falling for it. The liars are seen for what they are. Maybe that's somebody who is trying to trick you into some kind of business deal or a sale or whatever. Maybe it's a relationship where somebody's got a whole other family somewhere you don't know about. There are a lot of ways that people get manipulated. And we fall for these things so much, but once we see them for what they are, it's so easy to see through. We need to be careful not to be steered by modern-day Pharisees. So, Jesus has been tried. He's been lied about. And the stage is set for his execution. Even the governor says, you guys know he didn't do this. He said, no, give us the murderer. We're going to let him go. It's starting to look like maybe to some witnesses there, it might be starting to look like Satan's on track to win. But we know that God often takes what Satan means for our bad, what is meant for our evil, and turns it into something for our good. And we see that in his death, burial, and resurrection. So next week we're going to get into the actual going to the cross, his burial, and his resurrection.